Is collaboration essential for successful electric fleet infrastructure?
Yes, definitely.
Is charging infrastructure the biggest bottleneck for electric fleet adoption?
No.
Should fleet operators invest in their own charging infrastructure?
Yes.
Is grid capacity underestimated for electric fleets?
No.
Will wireless charging be crucial for electric fleet adoption?
No.
Will e-charging stations along the road solve the electric vehicle's autonomy?
Yes.
Welcome to Fleet Talk, a podcast series by Tip Group where we invite industry leaders to talk about today's industry challenges and their impact. I'm Cass, and today we are welcoming Roel Vissers, Chief Commercial Officer at Milence, to talk about the infrastructure of electric fleets. Hi, Roel.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having us at Milence today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Very pleased to be in the podcast today.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Roel Vissers. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Milence. Joined Milence 2.5 years ago, being part of the first 6 employees at Milence. So I still remember the day that we established Milence on the 8th of July 2022, where we had no office, no bank account, no laptop, no mobile phone, and that was the first day of Milence. I have been in e-mobility now for 5-6 years. Also, my previous job, I was into the manufacturing and engineering of charging hubs, charging stations. Within Milence now, the Chief Commercial Officer and responsible for product development, marketing, and sales, including the energy strategy. About Milence, we are the joint venture of Daimler Truck, Volvo Truck, and Traton. And that's quite unique, that fact that those 3 competitors joined forces to solve one of the largest issues in the electrification, in the transition to electric fleets. Milence, we are building a European network, open to everybody, open to all brands, only trucks, not for cars, open to all brands. And not only providing a charging experience, not only charging the trucks, but we provide a full rest and recharge experience. So we also want to take care for the driver, and all our sites will be safe and secure and comfortable for drivers.
So charging is really your thing.
I'm into charging now for a few years, yes.
Before we start, can you share something that no one knows about you?
Well, I would not say no one, but what many people don't know is that actually I started and owned a car mechanic company while I was studying mechanical engineering at the Delft University of Technology. So next to charging, I also have been into car mechanics and maintenance for quite some time.
That's really cool. All right, I'll directly jump into the topic because I'm super curious to know your take on that. What is the most interesting part of working in the EV charging infrastructure with fleets also?
What's most interesting is that this is really a nascent market. This is a new industry. Although many people would say we already charge cars for quite a while now, but charging trucks and charging fleets is a total different ball game.
Yeah.
We charge the same electrons, but the whole ecosystem is different. The customer expectations are different, and we are really at the first days and years of a huge transition which will take place in the next 15-20 years.
Well, agree with you. It's true that we are in the very middle of some changes. And actually talking about changes, have you come across any exciting EV innovation or development recently?
Yes, definitely. And I think, my opinion is that you're actually, talking not to me personally, but you're talking with one of the most innovative innovations, developments into the EV industry, which is the establishment of Milence. It has not happened very often in the history in the last 50 or 100 years that the 3 competitors, which are so fiercely competing each other already for tens of years, actually join forces to solve a problem, not only for them, but in the end for the whole transport industry in Europe. And I think that's quite unique. People don't very often realize this or think about that, but I think that's actually a huge innovation by itself. But talking innovations in the industry, an innovation I'm very excited about is the megawatt charging, which is really a new technology where we right, where the industry took all the learnings from the current charging standards, from CCS charging, and actually we developed a new standard, more reliable, higher performance, and that's a standard. The megawatt charging technology, that's what we will need to really to have this transition succeeding.
That indeed sounds super interesting, having these three partners collaborating together. And I think this is really the key. That's also what you mentioned earlier. And talking about these partners, what do you think is the recipe for success, for having everyone working together for success?
The recipe for success is having a joint mission, having a joint goal, and in the end, the goal we have, and which is the mission of Milence, to accelerate the transition towards a zero-emission transport industry in Europe. To have that joint mission, that's what unites even the most fierce competitors.
True.
And that's also why I'm quite confident that we will succeed in building this infrastructure and driving this transition.
And how do you see collaboration in the landscape? Have you been into any successful partnerships, of course? Have you seen any in the landscape?
Yeah, for us, our view on this transition is that nobody can transition alone. The challenge is really huge for every stakeholder in this transition. We see OEMs working very hard on delivering quite exciting products, new trucks with bigger battery capacities, with much better energy efficiency, which are planned for series production, which are being sold and planned for delivery by the end of this year and next year. We see charging technology companies collaborating on one hand on the mega charging standard, which is about to get finalized, but also to develop their first megawatt chargers, which is in the end needed to make this transition work. Governments who start either financial support schedules, subsidies, or tender processes to support the CPOs like Milence to build a network faster. So I see there's a lot of in the end to make this transition happen. There's many stakeholders, and I'm really positive to see so much dedication and hard work from each of those stakeholders to make it work.
True, very true. You said that charging infrastructure is not the bottleneck of the industry for adopting electric fleets. Why? What's your take on that?
I think that's quite a statement, right?
It is. It is.
Anyhow, right? Kind of being forced to say yes or no. I prefer to know. No, but that's definitely not. Definitely not the only bottleneck. I also don't know whether it's the biggest bottleneck. I see two main bottlenecks, maybe three. One of the main bottlenecks is the price of the trucks. In the end, the TCO calculations of the transport companies, of the fleet operators, as this is so cost competitive industry, TCO is extremely important, one of the most important elements. Today the electric trucks are still too expensive. However, again, I think this is also a chicken and egg situation again, because in the end, to lower the prices of the electric trucks, we need to produce them and sell them in higher quantities. And it is true that many fleet operators are hesitant to buy electric trucks because there's no infrastructure. On the other hand, I believe that if trucks would be a lot more cost competitive, a lot more fleet owners would already start buying electric trucks today. So in my view, it's not only one bottleneck. I see multiple bottlenecks. And a new bottleneck which is arising and starting to complicate more and more is the grid congestion in several regions in Europe, which makes it even harder for fleet operators to transition because of grid congestion and not being able to build a few depot chargers on one of their premises. Obviously, Milence also has the challenge of grid congestion to build our network. The situation today is that it's simply a bit harder to find the right locations where we have sufficient power. It's not impossible, but obviously it's not accelerating the build out of the network today.
So obviously my next question is about how can we solve these challenges? Is there anything subsidies, you mentioned government companies can actually do to make some progress?
Definitely. I think there's a few elements to solve the rollout or to build more infrastructure sooner. Has a few elements. One is the timeline of getting infrastructure built. Building permit processes or planning processes across Europe are definitely not uniform. In some countries, we are able to build charging hubs quite quickly. Mm-hmm. We get approvals quickly. In other countries, this is a very lengthy and administrative process. So where governments definitely can step up, mm-hmm. And we are actually also voting for one European way, one permitting process, way of working across Europe to have this charging infrastructure being built. So that's on speeding up the network build out. The grid situation is obviously a bit harder. That's not built in a few months. Mm-hmm. On the grid side, there's two different views. One is the physical view, the amount of copper cables either in the ground or above the ground. And on the other hand, it's the regulation. Yeah. And very often, the physical capacity is actually there, but the use of the physical capacity is limited by regulation. Yeah. So in those cases, regulatory authorities could make changes or could make energy regulation more innovative, more flexible, and actually by allowing the physical grid infrastructure to be used more efficiently. On the other hand, very often the amount of copper, the physical boundaries of the system are indeed limiting further expansion of the network. Over there, we are pleading for quicker regulation again. Governments need to support rollout of grid infrastructure better than they do today.
So let's say I'm a fleet manager or a fleet operator, and I want to invest, or at least I'm considering investing in EV fleet, of course, to meet my sustainable goals. Should I invest in my own charging infrastructure, or what do I need to consider before making this decision?
Yeah, there are many strategies out there, and there are many different advices. My personal view and also Milence's view is that we encourage every fleet operator to at least build some depot charging infrastructure. I think it's important that you have some core capacity built at your depot. Our view is that you should question yourself, or you should make the analysis how much depot charging infrastructure you would like to own. Mm-hmm. The question is, and that's a balance between kind of the amount of security or maybe perceived security, because the question is whether it's real security. So what's the charging capacity you own and you have full control, and you feel more secure in planning your fleets, versus public charging, which you don't own, and you potentially feel less secure about the planning of your fleet. And that also relates in the end to cost. In my view, and I have some insights also from my previous job, people are heavily underestimating the cost of depot charging. So people are very often referring to depot charging only cost me a few cents per kilowatt hour, mm-hmm. because I have depot charging is really cheap. I think people need to realize the full system cost of depot charging. For depot charging, very often also grid upgrades are required, including new substations. The solar roof was also not a free investment.
True.
Potentially, you need battery storage systems to temporarily store the solar energy into battery systems. You need charging equipment. You need all kinds of on-site site energy infrastructure. But that's just the investment.
Yeah.
Then you need potentially someone in your company, or you need to outsource that, to monitor the network.
True.
Is it operational? Is it reliable? If something is broken, someone needs to be sent to fix it immediately. You pay SLAs, maintenance contracts on your charging infrastructure, on your substations. So in the end, if you look to the full system cost of depot charging, it's actually much higher than, well, in my view, most people think. And by the way, that's assuming that the technology you buy actually lasts the full, I would say, depreciation timeline. Until now, and obviously we're still in the early days of electrification, I don't know any project where the hardware was not changed before the end of the lifetime. Because of the technology developments go so quickly,
Yeah.
right? It's not guaranteed that the depot you build will actually last for 10, 12, or 15 years. So I think that's on the cost of depot charging versus public charging, which is also not a debate-free topic. And then it is the question of a fleet operator to make the choice whether you want, well, to have actually all that capital locked into charging infrastructure, which is in that sense not your core business because you're a fleet operator,
Yeah.
and you need to run a fleet, or whether you actually outsource all the market risk, technology risk, operational risk, and rely more on public charging. Milence, we obviously have the view on the latter, not because it would only benefit Milence, but in the end, if we would do so, we would create a much more efficient charging system in Europe than in a situation where everybody would build very large depot charging hubs themselves. And then you can also make a comparison with the old diesel situation. 30, 40 years ago, most of the fleets had their own diesel pumps on their premises. Today, nearly nobody has anymore. And I do see quite a similarity with that situation where I advise and I encourage fleet operators to have some depot charging infrastructure on their premises. I would not be surprised if in 15, 20 years from now, actually most of the fleet operators don't own depot charging anymore.
Okay.
Because in the end, there's a very reliable public charging network has been built with also the right megawatt charging technology, which fits the flexibility of your planning, of your scheduling.
Okay, got it. And now, what about grid capacity? Will I have enough power for my operations?
I think the question is yes and no. Because I think there's one element which is, in my view, very often forgotten or not so clear in many public discussions about grid capacity, which is the time, right? So we will not transition 100% of all trucks to electric trucks by next year.
True.
So anyhow, we also with the European regulation, we agreed that we take time until 2039 to transition most of the trucks towards zero emission trucks. In our view, the majority will be electric trucks. So there's a timeline in where this transition happens, which is 15 years, which on the one hand is a very long timeline, but on the other hand, we also know that very large grid upgrade projects easily take 10 or 12 years to accomplish. So on the one hand, I fully support the current situation and the current debates on, it almost sounds like that we have an emergency on the European grids, which in that sense I support, because if we don't make that noise today, then in 12 years from now, the capacity will not have been built. But on the other hand, if you look at the transition and at the next 3 or 5 or 7 years and how that transition will happen, how many electric trucks we actually can produce and how many electric trucks we can actually sell to fleet operators, then apart from some specific regions in Europe, apart from every individual case, because every fleet operator is an individual case and everyone has their own use case, but in general, for the next 3, 5, 7 years, in my view, there is not a problem. The current systems can definitely support a transition for the next few years. In the Netherlands, for instance, we have quite some challenges with a quite fierce grid congestion. As some areas in Germany, in Belgium, in Sweden as well. But there's also quite a lot of regions in Europe don't have grid congestion yet, and you can actually build charging infrastructure and you can get access to grid at quite high capacities.
So you talked about saving time and building infrastructures now for fleets in 10, 15 years. What about charging stations that are wireless charging or even megawatts, which you also mentioned earlier?
Well, as I said, megawatt charging is for us a crucial technology. Milence, we are a very strong supporter of megawatt charging, and I can also explain you why. So it's crucial for the transition that a charging network is being built along the highways, along the main transport corridors in Europe, connecting the main logistic hubs, transport hubs, industrial hubs in Europe, where there's the most of the transport flows. And that's also the Milence strategy, right? So the Milence network we are building is connecting the main industrial hubs in Europe. And we support that by building charging hubs close to those industrial hubs, but also along the routes, along the highways, to connect the industrial hubs. We are building our charging hubs predominantly off-highway. And the reason why we build off-highway is a few. The first one is that building charging infrastructure actually takes quite some space. And we in Europe already have a challenge on parking places for trucks to park and rest during the nights. So what we don't want to do is actually to take even more parking places away from those truck drivers, because we want to build charging infrastructure. So we are building off-highway to actually add new charging and parking capacity to the system, but also be able to really provide that safe and secure and rest and a safe and secure and comfortable place to stay for truck drivers. Secondly is obviously also that building off highways are generally less expensive locations than building directly at the highways. And as I mentioned before, I've never seen a more cost competitive industry than the transport industry.
True.
And although today, right, the transition to electric is not cheap, Milence needs to design a system which really supports the cost competitiveness of the industry. So we will build that European network, but obviously we cannot build that network alone. And luckily also the European governments are also supporting a further rollout of the network. So in Europe we have the A4 regulation, the alternative fuels regulation, which puts mandates, puts targets on how many charging stations are built along the 10T highways, along the most important transport corridors in Europe, and which has a few intermediate targets in 2027 and 2030 to actually put an obligation on the member states to support the local markets to have this infrastructure being built. So in my view, that's quite a strong message, and also should bring quite some confidence to also fleet operators that this regulation is in place. Member states are forced kind of to support the markets to have this infrastructure being built. And in my view, fleets can be quite confident that in a few years from now, this charging infrastructure also will really be built. And Milence, we are, well, one of the first. We are having the focus to build a dedicated EV-only truck charging network in Europe. But many more, in that sense, competitors will join, either driven by the market opportunity of building charging hubs, or driven by member states who want this infrastructure to be built because of the European regulation.
So the governments are securing charging hubs in all countries in the end, in a way.
In a way, they are. So always needs to be seen how they support the markets. The AFIR itself provides quite some financial incentive for CPOs like Milence to build charging hubs. Milence, we are confident that this incentive is definitely accelerating the rollout of the network. But of course, in the end, we are again in a chicken and egg situation where we also need to have the fleets converting to electric trucks in the end to also make charging hubs utilized more, to make charging hubs actually generating money so Milence can further expand the network. So it is a constant balancing act between building more charging infrastructure, but also fleets need to step in and convert a larger part of their fleets to electric.
So you mentioned megawatt charging. Can you give us more information on that? Why is that the big thing in the market right now?
Yeah, sure. Why megawatt charging is so important? Let me first, shortly explain megawatt charging. So what is megawatt charging? Megawatt charging, as obviously the name suggests, is charging at higher speeds. The current CCS standard, which is today also used for passenger cars, is kind of limited to 400 kilowatt, which is obviously a lot. There's almost no passenger car who can take that energy. But trucks are a bit bigger, and they can also take
slightly bigger,
and they can also take more energy. So already a few years ago, the megawatt charging standard was developed, which is a global standard. The whole world is in that sense involved, which is a different technology. The shape of the plug is different. So, don't be afraid, it won't fit your car. So the shape of the plug is different. The communication protocol is different. And in the end, more power can be transferred to the plug. So the megawatt charging standard allows for up to 3 megawatt of power. That's definitely not something trucks can take today. But there's one important element of European transport, which is the driving time regulation. So truck drivers need to take a 45-minute break after 4.5 hours of driving, or they split it 45-minute break, but they need to take this 45-minute break. So a truck needs more or less 400 to 500 kilowatt hours to drive 4.5 hours. And in the end, you want to charge that 400 to 500 kilowatt hours again in 45 minutes. Yeah. So you need more or less, on average, you need a charging speed between 700 to 800 kilowatt to actually fully charge your truck again in those 45 minutes, so you can do the next 4.5 hours of driving.
And without losing time.
Without losing time. So today, with the current CCS technology, truck drivers, fleet operators need more or less 1.5 hours, maybe even up to 2 hours, depending on the charging speed, the maximum charging speed of the truck, to charge the batteries. And that's a lot of lost time, where the fleet operator not only needs to pay the driver, but also, cannot make money with his truck. So for Milence, megawatt charging is extremely important because it enables transport companies to charge their trucks within the mandatory driving time regulation, where they anyhow have to stop. They are obliged to stop.
Yeah.
So, and that's why from Milence, we have always stated that the majority of our network will be megawatt charging. Today, there are no trucks on the market who actually have a megawatt charging outlet. Right? So today, the technology is not there. But for next year, several OEMs have announced to start selling megawatt-enabled trucks. Milence, we want to be the highest quality network, the highest performing network. So in the end, in a few years from now, the majority of our charging plugs will be megawatt charging to actually support all those fleet customers out there to not lose time. And to not lose time is a crucial element into, getting the TCO, the total cost of ownership, as competitive as possible with the current diesel technology.
Time is money, as we say.
Time is money.
Is there one final thing you would like to share with the audience, or one final advice you would like to tell us?
Well, I would really like to encourage fleet operators to start the transition, and I can understand, especially in this cost competitive industry, that people can be hesitant. That maybe some people are not even convinced that battery technology is the future technology to go. We obviously are, but we really would like to challenge them. Buy or lease your first electric truck. Try the truck. Try to use the electric truck for your routes, for your transport. Milence, we have built the first 3 hubs, but we should not look at hubs as a hub, but actually as a tool to open a corridor. So for us, the Venlo hub opens the corridor Antwerp to the Ruhr area in Germany, and most of the current customers at Venlo are actually using Venlo indeed as a stop to enable that route to go electric already today. And kind of you could have a look at that. At all the hubs we have today and which are being opened in the next months, they all open small corridors, where we already, with the technology of today, with the trucks of today, without the megawatt charging, which there is not today, we already open corridors, and we can already, and transport companies can already use those corridors with electric trucks. So kind of my final message is, have confidence that this network is being built. We have very strong confidence in the fact that battery technology is the future technology also for heavy duty transportation. And the call out is get your first or your second or your 5th electric truck soon.
So testing now is in the end a strategic and competitive advantage for the future in the end.
It definitely is, and I think people should be aware that it should not become a disadvantage if you're too late.
We like to end the podcast with one fun question. If you had a magic wand, what would you change?
Does it need to be business or can it? No.
Whatever you think is the best.
I'm into construction of my new house. No, a magic wand to solve anything. I think that what would really give a lot of confidence to the transport sector, to what would give a boost to the acceleration, and it sounds maybe a bit cliche, but is if we could really solve the grid capacity situation. So although I said earlier in the podcast that the grid capacity is not always a limiting factor, but in my view, it's also it does scare off people. I think if we could give that message that grid capacity is, I would not say unlimited, but a very big element of fleets not moving to electric is at least taking away.
All right, I think this is already the end, sadly. Thank you so much, Roel, for the insightful talk. We covered many different areas, current challenges, future strategic plans. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you for all your questions. Has been a great interview. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to us, and stay tuned for the next Fleet Talk podcast.